Well, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
How's everybody doing?
Yes.
Rock and rolling. We braved the snow. My name is Mariah. I almost said Mariah Lynch. I am no longer a Lynch. I'm recently married, so my last name is now Burkert, which is hard to say, but that's okay.
We keep lobbying Josh to change it to Burke, and he's not going for it.
I know. I'm like, look, we could both change our names, and he gave me the look, like, are you for real? And I was like, it would be fun. We could file the paperwork together. He wasn't going for it, so we tried. I would love to go through and get some names from people, just because I know not everybody knows each other here. And if you're willing to share, along with your name, share one New Year's goal / resolution. It can be a serious goal. It can be something, because you're like, I'm springing this on you. You're like, and if you really want, you can be like, look, this is my name. I don't want to share a New Year's goal. And I'll be like, okay, that's fine. Thank you guys for sharing. Now, as Crystal alluded to, a lot of people view the activity of setting a New Year's goal or resolution with this sort of fatalistic pessimism. I've felt it myself. You can't quite understand how they can be so pumped up about the gym membership and the new organization system, and then those emotions translate into approximately 2 weeks of frenetic activity, and then it sort of falls off the edge, and you're like, well, that was short-lived. And it's those goals were unsubstantial. The planning is ultimately comes to naught, and you feel frustrated. Don't even talk to me about those New Year's resolutions. I don't want to hear it. It's stupid. It's pointless. Don't talk to me. And that sort of feeling translates into the word hebel, which is the key word that sort of is the heartbeat, the veins and the blood of Ecclesiastes. It encapsulates really what he's trying to solve, what he's trying to figure out. How do we face the fact that life seems, and we'll talk about sort of the range of meaning in the word, but life seems to be, in a lot of ways, frustrating. Life is short. Life has all of these things that pop up that we don't understand, and it seems to be fleeting and insubstantial, and he's trying to figure out how to face life in the face of that. So as we study the book, we're going to join the author of Ecclesiastes, exploring how we too can overcome life's apparent futility, and especially for us today, by embracing our calling as not just followers of Christ, but specifically as women, and fixing our eyes on the eternal perspective that we have. Now, before we dive in to sort of the meat of the study, I am providing an additional study guide for you guys. I just talked about it briefly at the beginning before everybody else came in. You don't need to take a study guide. If you're like, look, I won't use it, totally don't need to, you can take the class. What's in it? There are 4 basic sections. There is blah, 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 instruction in the beginning. So you have, if you turn to page 7, there is a multiple section that sort of says, hey, here's the study guide guide. If you want to turn there, you can. There's a map it out page for each chapter. Now, we have a bonus map it out page, which I'll talk about in a minute. But for chapter 1, if you turn to page 12 and 13. Now again, this is optional, you don't have to do it, but if you want to, this is an opportunity for us as Bereans to sort of get into the word yourselves, because we're all quite competent to read our Bibles. So as we go through this, it provides space for, if you want to follow sort of the directions and say, oh, I'm going to circle the figures of speech or whatever, you can. Do you need to? No. And if you don't think, well, that's fine. But if you're like, oh my gosh, this revs my engine, please go ahead and certainly do that. That's the map it out section. It has, a couple of questions for you to just think about the text itself. Trail log is for taking notes. If you are the type of person who likes to take notes, I'm the type of person who likes to take notes, so we like to provide that space. If you're like my husband, he tries to take notes sometimes because he's like, I feel excited about, and then he's missed about half of the sermon, so he doesn't take notes anymore. He's just like, can you take notes? I'm like, yeah, I got it. So if you want to take notes, that's that section right there. This checkpoint is something that I will sort of guide us through at the end of each class, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking. And it'll just have a couple of questions. So what stood out? It's just a period of reflection. Do you have to write something down? No. But if this is helpful for you, it's just another step in the process to help you think through the material. The Hit the Trail section is optional take-home work for you to do to think about how does this apply to my life. And so this study will have an optional small group meeting at my house on Wednesday afternoons. If you're like, oh my gosh, I'm free Wednesday afternoons, I want to visit Mariah's house. I just want to visit Mariah's house. I just want to see what she's done to it. Feel free to come. You don't need to come to all of them, but if you are ever free and you want to come over Wednesday afternoon, make sure I'll remind us at the end, see me at the end so that I can make sure we have enough snacks and everything. So you already have intro and chapter 1 in here. We'll give you the new section each week. So if you are not going to be here for any reason and you sort of want to see what's going on, let me know. So we're going to dive into any questions.
What's Hebel?
We're going to talk about it.
Oh, okay.
We will.
Good question.
The great question, 5-star question. So brief background as to why I feel like I can talk sort of cognizantly about the book of Ecclesiastes. I first officially became involved with leading Bible studies whenever I was actually still in youth group with Pastor Jeff. And it was during this time that I first sort of encountered the book of Ecclesiastes as something beyond just totally incomprehensible, because Jeff did it as a class in youth group. It was a pretty fun year whenever death is the destiny of every man was our youth group theme.
Truth.
Pretty cool. Whenever I went to LBC, I had a wisdom literature course with a man named Dr. Soden, a very wise man who, again, went through the curriculum. Whenever I told Jeff, oh my gosh, I'm taking Ecclesiastes again, he pointed me to a man named Dr. Al Furt, who is perhaps the smartest dude out there on the book of Ecclesiastes. If you do a Google search on him, look at, he's with Liberty University, his stuff will pop up. He has some great lectures and a dissertation on Ecclesiastes, so if you really want to go nerdy and deep, that's the place to go. So I got some stuff from him, and then I went to Colorado. You guys have heard about some of my adventures in Colorado, some of you haven't. I went out to Colorado, I was out west, I did crazy stuff inside. While I was out there, I again went through the book of Ecclesiastes, this time as a sort of a personal study, and it really walked me through my time out there and sort of became more of a friend rather than just, oh yeah, something that I've studied from a distance, and the truths in there became practical to my heart. And then, I feel like that's not, oh no, I'm like, that's not the right side, it is the right side. Whenever I came back to Pennsylvania, Jeff did Ecclesiastes as an additional Sunday school class, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's my friend Ecclesiastes. So I came back and went through it again, and then whenever I was back in Pennsylvania, I had the opportunity to do grad school at Millersville University, and I took a Shakespeare class with a man named Dr. Miller, and during that Shakespeare class, one of the projects we had to do was write a paper on one of Shakespeare's plays, which I wanted to just literally shoot myself in the foot, because as much as I like studying the Bible, I really don't like studying literature, and I teach college writing. Like, oh, do you teach the book stuff too? I'm like, no. No, I am not. Please don't make me do it. I don't know why. My poor mother is like, I thought I taught you to, I don't know why I don't. But whenever I was going through one of his plays, The Tempest, I noticed a whole lot of themes that were sort of like reminiscent of what came up in Ecclesiastes, and so I wrote a paper on, I cheated. I was like, I'm just gonna write a paper on Ecclesiastes. So I basically wrote a paper on Ecclesiastes in grad school. So throughout this time, I've really enjoyed getting into the book, and I don't know if I particularly have anything, as the writer of Ecclesiastes says, there's nothing new under the sun. So if I say anything that's like super new and exciting, you may want to pull me aside and be like, hi, I think that you may want to double check yourself there. But I think that what's exciting about this class is that we are women. And because we go through specific struggles and we have a specific calling in our lives as women, the application specifically, I want us to be able to spend a little bit more time thinking about, okay, how do these truths especially make sense in our lives as we are trying to follow Christ and trying to fulfill our calling? So that's our goal. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah. So, this is week 1. You know what that means. it's introductions, right? So we have to do the overview of the book of Ecclesiastes. As we like to say, it's like, the real estate, location, location, location. Instead, it's context, context, context. So this is the week where we go and we spend all this time talking about all of the stuff that you're like, yeah, I'll put it in the back of my brain and probably forget about it. But if it's interesting, so the title, Ecclesiastes, comes from the Greek word ecclesia. And you may be familiar with the Greek term ecclesia because it is the word in the New Testament that is translated as church. So church is sort of the word that the title comes from. And what's interesting is that the author name, Kohelet, is the Hebrew for one who assembles or gathers. And what they are assembling or gathering can be either people, so like gathering people together for the purpose of teaching, or gathering the wisdom and knowledge itself. And so I feel like those two really go hand in hand. So somebody who gathers wisdom, like a sage, and then the person who is distributing that information, a teacher or preacher. As you go through the book of Ecclesiastes, you'll see that it's in the beginning, it's at the end, and then it's right in the middle. And chapter 7 is the title. Whenever I reference the author, I will refer to him as Kohelet, partially because I think that word captures the essence of his identity in this book, and partially because there is a lot of debate out there, even today, about who the author is. For a while, people were saying, oh, it's Solomon. It's definitely Solomon, because in the first verse or second verse, it says the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. And so people are like, well, who is the son of David who ruled in Jerusalem? Solomon. It's Solomon, right? And there are some elements from chapters 1 and 2 that seem to especially line up with Solomon's life. They say, hey, gathered a lot of riches, you have a lot of stuff, you enjoyed your life, you built these great works. And so we see also in the book of Proverbs that Solomon, it looks like, compiled or wrote a lot of the wisdom that's in Proverbs. And so those are elements that sort of point to the fact that Solomon is the writer-author. There are, however, some things on the other side that sort of make scholars question. One of them is the fact that there's a lot of past tense that's used throughout the book. So I was king in Jerusalem, and so you're like, well, Solomon was king until he died. So there's not a point in his life where he was like, I'm going to retire from kingship. Because that didn't happen in these days, right? So like you either were king until you died and then your son took over, or you were not so kindly removed from the throne, killed, and then somebody else took your place. So there was no retirement in these days. And so that's something that makes scholars sort of question. Now, some of it you can sort of explain away with possible Hebrew tenses, so that's not my biggest objection. One of the other things, so in Ecclesiastes 1:16, he says that, I gathered more wisdom and knowledge than all the rulers in Jerusalem who were before me, which is a kind of weird thing to say whenever, first of all, how many kings in Jerusalem over the nation of Israel who ruled from Jerusalem were there? One. Yeah, just one, because Saul didn't reign from Jerusalem. He reigned from, what, Gilgal? I wrote it down and deleted it. Why? I think it's Gilgal. And David reigned from both Hebron and Jerusalem, but so there was only one. It's David. And it's sort of weird for him to be like, look, I did so much more than my dad. Like, look, dad, he's just sort of off to the side there. But I have gathered so much wisdom. Now, again, it's not the end of the world. You could say, well, he's just sort of using an exaggerated technique to be like, I'm wise, I've gathered information. But it strikes people a little bit weird, a little bit the wrong way. The other thing that is perhaps, and you'll see throughout the text as we go through that there are other things that jump out and you're like, oh, that doesn't quite jive with the fact that Solomon is the author. And again, as we see those things, I'll highlight them and say, this is one reason why it seems sort of questionable. The biggest reason in my mind that it seems that Solomon may not be the author is that we know that Solomon, toward the end of his life, definitely took a dive off the diving board into idolatry. He allowed his heart to be pulled away by all of those foreign women he brought into his court. And as far as we can see from scripture, it wasn't like he had this great restoration period where he was like, oh, idiot, what was I doing? And sort of had this big turn back to faith. Now, some people point to the book of Ecclesiastes and they say, oh, look, he wrote this as a sort of return to his senses. And that's possible. That's a possible thing. But from the book of Ecclesiastes, as you'll see as we're going through, what Kohelet talks about as he's sort of laying out all of these things that he's experienced, specifically in the area of pleasure. And I'll point this out again as we go through, but he says, I've done all of this with wisdom. It wasn't that his heart's being pulled away, and you don't see that anywhere throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. Nowhere does he seem like he's having an idolatry problem. It's all, he's looking at life very carefully. He's trying to examine it, and he's trying to determine by wisdom what exactly is going on. And so I will refer to him as Kohelet. I am open to the possibility of Solomon having written it. I am open to the possibility of it having been somebody who sort of assumed a role or a guise of Solomon. This is something that was done during this time where you would sort of say, I'm writing in the voice of this person. And so Solomon was known as the wisest man of his time. So it was not unheard of for you to be like, I'm writing in this sort of persona to say, hey, I've gathered wisdom. This guy had stuff. You can go either way on it, and I'm not gonna, this is not a hill to die on. So I will just refer to him as Kohelet and point those things out as they come across. When was it written? Well, we don't know who wrote it. And so the date of writing is really up for question. There are arguments that can be made both for, hey, it was written at the time of Solomon. There's things like, again, evidence of the temples there. There's language that makes sense for that time period. And then there's stuff, evidence that they're like, hey, there are these Persian words, there's these Phoenician and Canaanite language that wouldn't have been there at the time. This means it has to have been written at a later date. And frankly, I'm not going to get into the weeds on this one because language study, I was like, the history of language, that's J.R.R. Tolkien. That was his deal. I spent approximately 2.5 minutes looking at it and I started to fall asleep and I was like, I can't. Like, nobody cares. Nobody cares. If you do care, you can go and you can look at sort of the nitty gritty of why the scholars are divided on this. It's possible that was written at the time of Solomon, somewhere between 971 and 931 BC, or after the Babylonian exile and the return to the land after the temple was rebuilt, so around 450 BC. There we go. Literary genre is wisdom literature. So as we're going through the book, there's a whole bunch of aspects that are related to the idea of the wisdom literature. You're going to see a whole bunch of poetry and poetic language. You're going to see proverbs. You're going to see, there are specific sections of Ecclesiastes that are written as a reflective autobiographical speech where he sort of stops just sort of talking in third person, and then he says, I, Kohelet, have been, and I saw everything that was going on, and I thought this was terrible. And so you'll see that throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. He includes example stories. You can say maybe parables. So he says, hey, I saw this. Whether it's a real story that he saw or if he's making up, I don't know. But you'll see those example stories, and you'll also see allegorical language, metaphor, especially as we get into chapter 12. It's all full of that stuff. It's great. Some devices that you'll see as you're reading through, you're going to see a lot of chiastic language, a lot of inclusios, chiastic. I looked it up the other day to check myself. I'm like, it's chiastic language. And I have been saying chiastic for years, and I don't know why, because it's not correct. It's like chiastic. So as a reminder, an inclusio is whenever you get to a section, and the section is marked by a theme of words or ideas at the beginning and a theme of words or ideas at the end. So it sort of captures off that section. A chiasm can be formatted a couple of different ways. In Ecclesiastes, you will see both this type of structure where you're going to see, hey, he lays out an idea, and then he lays out a point, maybe an example, a point, and then a separate point, and that drives to a central idea, and then he sort of reverses on his way back out, sort of hits the same ideas on his way back out. The other thing that you'll see in Ecclesiastes is a 1, 2, 3, and then parallelism. 1, 2, 3, or just parallel. So point 1 and parallel. That this comes up a lot. And so this is very different from what we look at whenever we're thinking about our traditional writings. We usually have my thesis statement. I know, because I'm writing on that. I'm like, okay guys, this is how you have to write your papers. Your thesis statement is going to tell me what your paper's about. Point 1, point 2, point 3, conclusion. There's no circling back. Don't circle back. Don't do it. And so this is different than what we're used to. So as we're going through Ecclesiastes, just something to be aware of, that Ecclesiastes is a very cyclical book. There are themes that reoccur. There are ideas that pop up again and again. And so but you'll see that there is development. So as he sort of circles around, his argument progresses. And we'll see that again sort of throughout the book as we go. So this wisdom literature seems to be written to a group of, well, we're going to assume Jews, because, well, you know, Israel. Probably middle class, no, neither so poor that they can't do diddly squat, nor so rich that they're like the cream of the crop. It seems to be written to roughly middle class. People who are working hard. You're going to see the word toil appear approximately 1 million times throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. I didn't count, but somebody did. You can look at it. It's a lot. But based on some of the language that he uses and some of the examples that he sees, these people specifically that he's writing to might be oppressed, or he might just be saying, hey, you may see oppression. So it's possible that they're oppressed, or it's possible that he's just acknowledging that they may have seen there were people who were oppressed as well. And they need wisdom to deal with the problem of life, which is that it seems to be Hebel. Now again, Hebel is our key word. It is a word that is so key that whenever I went through the scripture that's in the book, I went through, and every time that there was an English word that was substituted for Hebel, I substituted it for Hebel. So whenever you read through, you're going to see Hebel in the workbook, because it has a range of meaning. Hebrew is one of those obnoxious, exciting languages that some words have like a range of meaning that goes from over here all the way to over here. And it's not really like English, where it's like, hey, either you have a turkey or you were too rough on a play. Like either it's foul or foul. Like we don't use like foul doesn't also mean foul in that sense. It's just one meaning that's assigned. In Hebrew, especially in wisdom literature and in poetry, oftentimes there are multiple meanings that are intended to be conveyed at the same time. Now, sometimes you're going to see throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, and again, we'll talk through the meanings in just a second, that there are going to be maybe just one or maybe two meanings that are most appropriate for the context. And then there are going to be some other times where we're going to look and be like, it seems like this meaning, this meaning, this meaning, and this meaning all make sense for the context. And that it makes sense for the language and for the time in which it was written, for the literary genre that it's in. So let's talk a little bit more about the word Hebel. The main translation of the word Hebel is vapor, and it sort of describes life's fallen condition. And as we think about the word vapor, if you go outside on one of these brutally cold days and it's early in the morning and you breathe out, you know how you get that really cool dragon's breath? How many of you guys have ever like taken a flashlight? When you were kids, obviously, and you were like, oh, and you're like, oh, I'm a dragon, I can breathe fire. I never did that, obviously. But so how long is it there for? Half a breath, right? It's there and then it's gone. Can you catch it?
No.
What about for like the briefest moment? Can you just like sort of hold it in? No. It's gone. And so that is a good start as to the description of what the word Hebel is. It's sort of like that breath that's just there and then it's gone. Can you grab it? No. Is there any purpose in pursuing it? No. And so there's a range of meanings with the word. First of all, we have sort of the family of transients. And whenever it's used in this sense, the emphasis is that it's brief, short, and fleeting. So either, the length of time is actually not very long, or it's just like, it's here and then it's gone. I'm reminded of whenever we were in Arizona, and we went on this hike sort of close to the Grand Canyon, and there were these really pretty primroses, and they were glorious, and they popped up, and we took all these great pictures, which was a good idea, because on the way back down, like an hour and a half later, they were dead, and I was like, they're gone. But it's because it was hot. It was perhaps the hottest trip I've ever had in my life, besides Israel, where we're not going, because anyway, we're going to move on from that point. So that's the idea behind the transience family. And so we are going to see oftentimes in the book of Ecclesiastes that the word Hebel is intended to convey, hey, it's not necessarily that it's bad, but it's just brief. Next is the idea of vanity. ESV uses the word vanity. King James, I think, uses the term vanity in Ecclesiastes. And the idea behind this is that it's insubstantial. Not the idea that it's sort of like puffed up, like, just look at my hair, I look fabulous today. That's not, that's the English word that we use vanity for, but in this sense, it's more like, again, it's not substantial, it's futile, it's not going to have a good result, and so there's no point in even trying. Or you can also think of the word empties. It's lacking in value, it doesn't have meaning, it doesn't have purpose. And so this is one meaning that we will use frequently, especially toward the end of sections, whenever he's describing, hey, it seems this is just an empty pursuit. There is no long-lasting gain, and gain is another word that we're going to take a look at in a minute. I better move faster though, because good word. Irony is another family of words that is used whenever whenever Hebel is used in Ecclesiastes, and you can already see why translating the book of Ecclesiastes is such a pain in the butt, because do you use the word brief? Do you use empty? Now, irony is totally different from these other two. So if you're going to define irony, most people are like, oh, that's so ironic. And that's not what it means. So irony is whenever something is the opposite of what's expected. Another sort of word that you may see is enigmatic or incomprehensible. It's difficult to understand, difficult to decipher. And Kohelet looks at life and he says, that's not what I would have expected. I would have expected this. That's Hebel. That is the opposite of what I thought. This is a hard situation to understand, a hard situation to figure out. So we'll see that meaning appear quite frequently. And then the last sort of category of meanings is frustration. So things don't go the way that you expect, don't go the way you want, and it results in those feelings of aggravation, annoyance, irritation. You're like, it's not okay. This is not okay. And it's not just though the sort of lighter feelings. So as I say frustrating, and you sort of feel like, oh, I got stuck in traffic. Like that's frustrating. Like it's like not the end of the world, but it's a bummer. This even goes farther to some words that are used are repulsive, or you'll see in a lot of commentaries the word foul. This is foul, and that's why I was thinking of the word foul. But it's the idea you look at something in life that is so profoundly unfair that you say that is repulsive. This should not be. That's hell. And so those are the sort of range of meanings that we're going to see throughout the book of Ecclesiastes with the word Hebel. And again, that's the problem that Kohelet sees as he's looking across at life, and he's saying, I'm seeing all of these things, and I don't quite know how to handle it. I'm going to write this book and say how the wise can navigate and infuse meaning into our fleeting, frustrating, seemingly meaningless world. And so that, as we go through the Ecclesiastes, that's going to be the message that we're going to see building throughout, even though, again, you may sort of look at it and be like, are you sure he's not just crazy? Because he seems like he's sort of like, boom, going over here, and then, woo, he goes over to the other side, and you're like, I have no idea what's going on. That's what he's building towards. And so there are, at the end of the day, really three goals or purposes that he's trying to drive his readers toward. And as I tell my college kiddos whenever they're writing their papers, I'm like, look, I don't want you to just say, my purpose is to persuade. I know that you're right. I know you're writing a persuasive paper. What do you want your audience to do as a result of reading your paper? And so the Kohelet, after his audience has read Ecclesiastes, he wants them to come away with three things. First of all, he wants them to accept life's heaviness. So he's sort of saying, hey, I want you to at least begin at the point of acceptance, right? It's that stage of grief where you're like, I acknowledge and accept that life is short, it's fleeting, there are some aspects that seem like there's no impact, there are frustrations. Start off with accepting it. Next, he wants his readers to reject bad assumptions about responding to life's heaviness. He's going to go through a range of options, ranging from all the way over here of, I'm just going to do whatever I want, I'm going to be wicked, I'm going to be evil, because what's the point? He's going to say, no, don't do that. But on the other hand, he's going to caution his readers, well, don't go all the way over to the other extreme and say, well, I'm going to try to navigate life so perfectly that I never have to experience any of that stuff. He's going to say, no, that's not how to do it. Don't go to any of these extremes over here. And he's going to try to get us to choose the best path for navigating life's heaviness, and we'll sort of explore what that looks like along the way. But he's going to show us that, and we're going to have additional wisdom that's brought to the issue, because even though Ecclesiastes was written, a long time ago, between 2,500 to 3,000 years ago, what we have now is the revelation of the New Testament. And so we're not just going to look at Ecclesiastes in that context of, okay, well, this is what he thought, and we're just going to stick to what he understood. We are going to bring in our New Testament perspectives because, well, there's progressive revelation. And so we are going to say, okay, well, as followers of Christ, how does this change for us today? So I'm going to briefly run through some themes, keywords, structure, and then so again, we talked about Hebel. This is oftentimes paired with the phrase striving after wind, chasing the wind, to trying to catch that breath. That's the idea behind that phrase. So you'll oftentimes see those words paired together. Another theme that we're going to see is this phrase under the sun, and this is going to be an important perspective for us to understand that Kohelet is looking at life this way. He acknowledges God, and he periodically looks up and says, okay, this is how heaven helps to make sense of it. But he is primarily just saying, hey, whenever I go out, this is what I see. This is what I see under the sun. And so that's an important phrase to take note of as we're going through. It's that it's an under the sun perspective. Another key theme that's important for understanding and for noticing in Ecclesiastes is wisdom. And Kohelet will both explain wisdom and say, hey, this is how the wise man does stuff. This is the wise path. He's also going to say, I'm looking at this, as we talked about earlier, with wisdom. Wisdom is my guide. And so you're going to see him saying throughout, again, especially the early half of the chapter, throughout the entire thing, that I'm looking at this with the lens of wisdom. I'm not just going about sort of running around, participating in these pleasures for the fun of it. I'm doing it with wisdom in mind. He's also going to evaluate wisdom and say, how effective is wisdom as a tool to help us navigate life? And spoiler alert, he's going to conclude that wisdom is ultimately not all that it takes in order to get that ultimate satisfaction, that ultimate meaning. I know it's a downer, it's terrible. Another theme that we're going to see is that God is sovereign and that we as humans are limited. I feel like I run into this every day of my life, so I'm like, yes, I got it. But for Kohelet, this is a struggle, and this is something that he's going to see, and it's going to bring about some frustration for him. And so again, as we pull in our New Testament perspective, I feel like we have a little bit of an advantage over him because we have a little bit more of the picture. But even with Kohelet, he's going to sort of bring in how God's sovereignty helps us as we navigate in our limitations. We're all gonna die, and Kohelet knows it. So the inevitability of death is another theme that recurs, and it is something that troubles him, and something that as he sort of sees, hey, this applies across the spectrum to whether you're rich or poor, whether you're wise or not, No matter how you live your life, everybody dies. And this is something that he looks at and he says, that doesn't seem right. And so we're going to see, again, that struggle recurring throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. Enjoyment of life is a refrain that you're going to see it 7 times throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, these enjoy life refrains. And these are sort of the peak upward into, okay, so these are the moments where he's sort of saying, despite everything that I see, these are the key moments where I'm saying, and yet this is what he thinks God wants us to do because of what he's given us. The final theme that he talks about throughout Ecclesiastes, and especially toward the end, is that because of all of this, we should fear God and have in mind that there is judgment coming. He acknowledges that it isn't just what we see under the sun, that there is something else on the way. And so to sort of be aware of that in all of our decisions that we're making. Now, again, we're going to run through just a few key Hebrew words, and I am going to tell you that, again, the Hebrew and then the English, because I've been studying it long enough that I may accidentally say I may actually be like, so amal and blah blah blah, and you're gonna be like, what? So I'm just gonna say them now, just that you get a brief word. If I ever say them in class and you're like, what's that? Just throw something at me, just throw a shoe, and I'll be like, oh, sorry, and then I'll say it again in English. So Hebel, again, we've talked about that range of meaning word. Inyan is a word that means business. I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with as all their days under the sun. So that's a word that pops up quite a bit. Be aware of it whenever you see the word busy or business. That is a key word that repeats. Amal, work or toil or labor. That's another very key, again, it relates back to the theme. So he sees, hey, what is all this work that we're doing? What does it come to in the end? What does it profit us beyond the end of our days? The fact that we have to work and then work again, and then work again, and then do it again, and again. Yitron is a very, very key word. It's the gain or profit. And this is a concept that he's possessed of. He wants to know, he wants to try to figure out, what can we do? What do we do on this earth that lasts beyond the grave? So what is the ultimate yitron that we get from all of these things that we're doing under the sun? Tov is a word that you have probably heard if you think through Genesis. So, and he saw that it was good. We see this translated both as good and better. So anytime you see in the proverb sections, this is better than, the word that you're looking at is good. So ultimately, we're going to see Kohelet sort of settling toward, maybe there's not gain in this situation, but this is still better. This is still better. And we're going to, again, pull in those New Testament perspectives as well. That was weird. It went backwards. It mislabeled. Whatever. Technology, don't trust it. All right, don't trust it. Don't trust Google. Don't trust technology. Don't trust any of it. It's all run by the commies. So Simha and Sama are joy and rejoice. You're going to see those words pop up hand in hand. Those go back to that enjoy life refrain. So those are the words that you're going to see that Kohelet is counseling his readers. Enjoy, take joy in these things. And so these are going to be key words to take note of. And this final word here, helik, is what Kohelet uses to refer to our lot in life, what God has given us. And sometimes it's used in a positive sense in the term of a reward, and sometimes it's just, this is the deck of cards that you've been handed. This is what God has given you. This is your helik in life. And so what do we do with the helik that God has given us today? Brief talk through the structure. This is easy. Look. All right, because the actual structure is so complicated. There's an introduction, there's an epilogue, and there's part 1, part 2. All right, and these are loose. Again, you're going to see themes recurring. So even though we're focusing on human effort in the first section, you're going to see even there that he notes that there are human limitations, and even in the second section where it's focused on the limitations, you're going to see those ideas of effort reappear. So those are general structure divisions. Even splitting the passages up into sections, my mom will tell you, she was like, I don't know whether to split it off at 3:15 or the end of the chapter. These ideas go so many ways. So There's lots of ways to split it up. There's lots of debate. That's a general thingy thing. So I didn't actually write the pages down because I forgot. So there's a bonus map it out. I know. I was trying to think of a way that I could do it while I was talking, and I was like, I can't do it. So there is again, if you want to take the book and do the work, there is HYO. Oh, so I have to scroll down to tell you what HYOH is. Hike your own hike, because you've noticed all the hiking lingo, like the trail log or whatever. So hike your own hike is a philosophy that you can decide on how to approach your trip and what works for you without feeling pressure to conform to others' opinions and how the trail should be hiked. This is hike your own hike. If you want to do this, you can hike your hike, but if you don't, you don't have to. So hike your own hike.
And there's no pressure.
There's no pressure. I'm not checking it. I'm not grading it. I won't even. It's great. I would still encourage you, if you do nothing else, at least read the chapters as we go through. There is a bonus map it out where everything sort of I told you. You can sort of check it out yourself. It's a sort of a read-through, general read-through, and say, okay, do I believe Mariah? No, I don't trust her. So that's on page 8 and 9, pages 8 and 9. And then pages 12 through 14 is the map it out section for chapter 1, which we will look at next week. If you want to do the checkpoint on your own time, you can do the checkpoint on your own time, which says, hey, what stood out to you about class? Otherwise, thank you guys so much for being here. Have a wonderful morning. Go eat breakfast.